Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Busboys and Poets Books presents Unbound with Tarana Burke. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight and joining us for this, quite honestly, very timely and very much fantastical event that we'll be having tonight. Now, I'm sure you all have heard about Miss Burke here. I'm gonna tell you, some audio technical difficulties, folks. Oh, I'm right by the speaker apparently, so let me move out here. Okay, there we go. So, folks, yeah, that sounds a lot better. I know it. And so, Tarana Burke is a native of the Bronx. The Bronx, yeah, Bronx, New York. And her name came into the mainstream media back in 2017 when every other white Hollywood actress was talking about hashtag Me Too without knowing that Miss Tarana Burke here has been talking about hashtag Me Too since 2006. Ain't that right? And with her today, we have her lovely, amazing friend, Joanne, and please yell at me if I mispronounce this. Equester?
Totally wrong.
I got terrible memory.
But you were so close.
Inwezo.
You were so close.
I've had to say it because names are what? Important.
Thank you for that.
And so with that, folks, please put your hands together. And those at home, put your hands together too. We'll feel it in spirit. Y'all can get started. I'm just here as decoration.
Hi. Can y'all hear me good? Yeah. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much. I just lost your mic. It is going in and out a little bit. Okay. Good? Yeah. All right. So thank you so much for joining us. We're here to sing a song. So, thank you so much for joining us. I did want to start off by saying that, this conversation is going to touch on some really touchy subjects. So, just a bit of a trigger warning. If the conversation is uncomfortable for you, feel free to get up, walk away, give yourself a minute, because some of the topics are a little bit heavy.
Yeah.
And this is my friend Tarana.
This is my friend Joanne.
And I'm going to tell you something about Tarana, right? So they say that you should never meet your heroes, right? What is it? I didn't tell you that to They say that you should never meet your heroes, right? But this one right here, well, they say that because they say that your heroes can disappoint you, right? And this one right here, I'll tell you, she lives up to the name, to the power, to the movement. She's generous, she's kind, she is like so real, and I'm just so honored to be a part of her world, and I just love you. I'm telling you, I just love you. So. I know. And I'm gonna tell you something about us too. So we were born on the same day. So we call each other twins. So we were born both on September 12th. And so that immediately connected us. And so our friendship kind of blossomed from there. So in any case, background. So I want to get right into it. Let's talk about the Slack that was going on. So in the beginning of the book, you talk about how unkindness is a serial killer. And you talk about this because you have had experiences with people being unkind to you. And so this is a topic that you can relate to, and I'm sure you have a perspective, and I'd like to know what you think.
I've stayed away from this topic mostly, just because I don't like to get into. I try to stay away from social media as much as possible, and I made a I made a vow to myself, promise to myself to try to sort of speak when spoken to a little bit. Or when I really have something to say. And I ventured into social media, I think yesterday, to give my perspective, a little bit of perspective. And I didn't want to talk about the slap per se.
Yes.
But instead I wanted to talk about what I call the first slap. Mm-hmm. And that was because I felt like there was not enough conversation about dating. And it wasn't enough. It's interesting. My friend said to me, who's a journalist, he said, I went through a bunch of the Getty images.
Yeah.
He was trying to look for the job, he was trying to look for reactions, and he said, the only person that checked on Jada, who all the images he saw besides Will, was Denzel Washington. He said people pulled Will to the side to check on him. You know, you see Tyler Perry and Denzel checking on Will, you see the publicist checking on Will, you see everybody checking on Will. Very few people checking on Will. Right. And the comparison that I gave on social media was about, and you know, folks got up in their feelings, but I don't care, this is my opinion. People got their feelings about this, but the actress Selma Blair, yeah, people know who Selma Blair is. The actress Selma Blair has MS. A lot of people don't know that. She's been very low-key about it. And last year, or at some point, she also cut off all her hair because of her treatments. And she hasn't been making a lot of, yeah, okay, that's fine. You know. And so I was just saying, let's do a little exercise. Mm-hmm. Imagine if Selma Blair, who also has been very private, came out on the red carpet on the biggest night in Hollywood for actors and actresses, right? One of the most public and visible. And had she been sitting in the front seat that said Leonardo DiCaprio, or Will Smith, for whatever reason, this is our imagination. And the same joke had been launched at her. Right. How much empathy would have been poured out for her?
Because of her condition, or because she's
not because of her condition, like because of her condition, obviously, but because when we see white women with short haircuts, when they cut up their hair, we automatically assume something's wrong.
Right.
She must have chemo. She must have cancer.
Right.
Why did she cut up all her hair? Something's wrong.
Yeah.
She's so brave. Look at the bravery of her sitting here with that short hair, with that bald hair. We're gonna leave her alone, right? Because she's so brave. Yeah. The assumption is that if something has happened, and she's brave enough to come out here with this bald hair. But when black women wear bald hair, like Ayanna Pressley, right, or Jada Pinkett, there's jokes, there's ridicule. Now, in the black community, black women say she's bad, she's bald, she's beautiful. But the rest of the world don't see that. We embrace our own. Right. And the backstory that people aren't telling, and this is, again, not about condoning what Will Smith did.
Right, and an outsized reaction.
It was an outside reaction. Come on, you know you can't be going outside.
Oh, wait, that's it was an outsized reaction.
For sure.
Right.
But I think that we also, there's a lot of context that folks miss and nuance that folks miss about the unkindness of having to endure public ridicule in the way that Jada has in the last 2 or 3 years.
Right.
Right? In the way that Will has in the last 2 or 3 years. Particularly from Chris Rock. The last time Chris Rock was on that stage, who was the target of his ridicule? Jada Pinkett. Right. The last time he was on that stage, he walked out. That joke was not scheduled. He ad-libbed it, which means he looked around the room and decided to make a joke about Jada Pinkett. Right. Chris Rock made a movie, even though it was a terrible, terrible movie, about black women in hair. There was a specific segment of that movie about alopecia. Right. Right? So there is context that I think other people didn't take into consideration that I think black women, and the other part, not for nothing, I know a lot of y'all women get it, and a lot of people can't hear this. I said this in private, but I'm gonna say it in public because we find it. It kind of felt like this is gonna sound crazy to some of y'all, but it felt like the OJ verdict. Y'all remember when the OJ verdict, y'all old enough to remember this. Y'all we knew OJ was guilty. We knew it was wrong, but y'all remember when that verdict came. It was like, we was running around celebrating Black Lives because Black folks kind of needed that. Right. We kind of felt we needed to win. I felt like for a minute, Black women kind of needed a minute to have like a stand up for us. Right. The slap wasn't right. Right. But in Chris Rock's own words, I'm not saying it was right. I'm just saying I understand. Right. So, I just think that sometimes we need to see a visceral reaction. Right. That's for us.
And also, going back to being unkind, people have said that they're not good. You should be used to this. Mm-hmm. Like, you know that you're supposed to be ridiculed. People are uncomfortable. And it is then absence of a human experience.
Absolutely.
And you don't get to be human.
You don't get to be human. And unkindness is a serial killer. It's death by 1,000 points. It's the thing that Will himself said. Like, we're supposed to take this over and over and over and over. Now, I have empathy for Chris Rock, too.
Right, for sure.
I can't imagine what it must feel like to be standing on stage in the last place you think you're going to be assaulted. The very last place in the entire world that you think you're going to be assaulted. And have somebody mollywop you.
Oh, out of nowhere.
Right. Out of nowhere. The whole thing is tragic.
Yes. None of this should happen.
Not traumatic, but tragic.
Yeah.
Sure. The whole thing is tragic. But, I also think that people who are like, I'm traumatized and my kids can't sleep at night. I'm like, how did y'all sleep January 6th when y'all see people scared on the wall? That's trauma. Trauma is seeing Black men lying in the street for 4 hours with nobody. Trauma is a girl lying in the bed and somebody kicking their door and shooting them in while they sleep. That's traumatic. I can't get over the ground and tell. How about you? Oh, don't talk about trauma. We got to put another conversation.
Are they going to welcome us back?
Let's talk about it. Some of these trauma conversations are starting to wear me down. Like, y'all are being right. Go watch, Will Smith dressed as Genie. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. I'm sorry.
All right.
Don't get me in trouble.
We can continue.
No,
You got something else to say?
no, man. Let's.
This is a good one? Okay. So, how many of y'all have read the book yet? All right. So, for me, the book is a masterclass in storytelling, right? It is a masterclass in memoir writing in that you were just so very raw. You cracked yourself wide open. You told so many dark things about yourself and about your past. And I just want to know what propelled you to tell your story this way, because honestly, we need to be witness, right? So what propelled you to tell it in this way? Because of course you are asked to write a book and you make decisions of what content you want to put in it. Why so private? I mean, why so personal? Why so much?
The book that came out is not the book I sat down to write. I was a little bit arrogant, I think, when I initially got the book deal. I was like, it's my life, right?
Right.
Your life. I'm gonna sit down and I didn't know that. I think people expected me to write about the last 5 years, and I don't know what people expected, but I do think there was some expectation about that, and I knew I didn't want to write about that. And I think in my mind, for my own protection, and I think a lot of survivors do this, for my own protection, I had mapped out my life in a particular kind of way.
Yeah.
There were memories that I did not access, places I didn't go in my own brain because they were dangerous.
Yeah.
Right? You can't go down that. hallway, I don't open up that box. And I thought, in my own arrogance, that I could tell my full story without accessing the things. And as I started to write, similar to that part of the story in the end when I had that sort of moment, those things were staring at me like, so you just think we're gonna sit here, you know? And it was a really difficult. And Garrett Kennedy, who I call my book doula, he was sort of my writing coach through this. And I would write, you know, a chapter, and I would send it to him, and he would write back and say, "What is this?" And he would say, you know, as a reader, I'm telling you, I would be angry. I'm reading this, and I can feel that there's more here, and you're not giving it to me. And I just kept coming back, and I would have these. I mean, I'm telling you, I have this outfit. It's not an outfit. It's just like a sweatshirt dress that I wore my whole to write this book. This is like, and I would put the hood on, and I have my bonnet and my scarf. You know the house, and you know during the pandemic, and I would put the hood on and pull it real tight and sit in the thing, and I'd be crying. It was so awful because I just didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
And then something would come, and I would just write. And I just let it come. It was incredibly cathartic for me. And I thought, I'm just gonna get it out, but I won't put it out to the world. And there's still a lot of stuff that I did. Down to the very last edit, there's a chunk that I took out about my stepfather that I felt like this doesn't advance the story, and it might be hurtful to my family. So I just chopped it, and I made it the last. And my editor was like, "You sure?" I said, "Yeah, go and take it out." It was just, so, you know, it was painful, but I needed it more so for myself.
Yeah.
I needed to, the lessons I learned for myself in writing this are so invaluable, and now I can really look the people, survivors, in the face and say this without unequivocally. There is, and I tell folks this all the time now, what I didn't know, and I've been through all the things. I've done all the therapies, I've done all the group therapies, I've done I've been into all the things. You tell me there's something out there, I will go sit in the forest and meditate. I will do all the things. There is more freedom to access by telling yourself the truth. And I didn't know. I really didn't know. To the point where I almost feel, ashamed is not the right word, but I almost feel irresponsible for not having done this level of work. And now I feel better talking to survivors. We have so much more freedom to access, not by getting up in big platforms and talking to people, not by going on social media. Everybody wants to start an organization, everybody wants to start a movement, everybody wants to go out, and I get hundreds of letters from survivors saying, I want to do the work, and I want to go help other survivors, and I get it, because that's what I do, right? I want to go do the best thing that we can do is start with yourself. Keep telling yourself the truth. I wasn't telling myself the truth. I was telling myself enough truth to get by.
Yeah.
You know, just enough to get by. And I would see that other truth out the side of my eye, and I just would, I don't even want to see, keep telling yourself the truth. And that's what I did with this book. I just kept telling myself more truth. It was the time I was literally physically sick. But the more truth you tell yourself, the more freedom you can access. And it's astonishing. You're like, oh.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
And so, speaking of this truth and accessing the truth, so Maya Angelou is, what would you say about who she is to you?
She's my person.
She's the person.
she's a group of, but she's in that group.
She's your person.
Yeah.
So, in the book, you talk about how when you read American Grace's and then you saw her perform Phenomenal Woman, it was like an awakening in that you kind of didn't understand how joy and pain can exist in the same body.
Yeah.
And so when you're talking about telling the truth, what is it about that healing process, living in the same body? What does that look like?
It looks like our real lives.
Yeah.
And I mean, you have to remember, I was 14 or 15 years old. And, you know, kids don't know anything.
Yeah.
I know some of y'all have children or around children and they think they know everything. These kids don't know anything. And I was a kid. And so, and I was a child who was desperately trying to patch together a life that felt like something.
Yeah.
And so I thought I had figured it out. And what I had figured out was what we would call a fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
That was the initial lesson that I pulled out from my angel, right? I thought, oh, you just have to, and not just from my angel, just from like life, from my family. You know, we both come from Caribbean families, and Caribbean, my family's part Caribbean, part Southern. But I had more Caribbean influence growing up.
Yeah, I mean, you grew up in New York.
Right, exactly. And so it is education.
Yes.
Education and more education. And so, and I think I talked about this in the book, but now I talk about it in life. It was about people paying close attention to the children who act out. They pay less attention to the children who are perfectionists. Right? And so I was the opposite. I was not, I mean, I was acting out in other ways, and I did it in secret because I wanted to get in trouble. So I was straight A's, track, honors club, everything. And I was actually being praised for being neurotic. This was neurotic behavior. You know, like, oh my God, I gotta be like this. Oh my God, I wish I had this. Oh, that was neurotic behavior. And I'm like, that's right. Study some more. I read 10 books this week. I got a name like you didn't read 10 books, you should read 11. This is neurotic behavior. This is not, I had so much anxiety, but we didn't have this language, right? Who would say anxiety to a child?
To a child, right.
Who would say anxiety in a Caribbean household, in a Black household? Just young, nobody say that's not anxiety. Calm your nerves.
Right.
Calm your nerves. Put some tussin on it. Go to sleep. There you go. What's up? Somebody, you know your grandmother. My grandmother was a Southern one. My grandfather was a Caribbean. My grandmother would tell me to go take a nap in a minute. Go lay down. Right? You need to calm down and go lay down. That's it.
Yeah.
That's all you had. And my grandfather just kept congratulating me and congratulating me. I'm sorry, y'all. That was so black. I know, but I've been staring at you this whole time. You know, I have my glasses.
Put your glasses on, girl.
That's my own baby. Child. Why you didn't say nothing? Hi, baby. I'm so sorry, guys. Oh, look at all. I can see everybody now. Hi, sweetie. I'm see after the show. I can see all the people. I want to be
Can you see me?
I can't. You know, they don't call me Babo, you know, they call me progressive, so we don't feel old. I feel like this. I'm going to wait till I do it. I bought it so I can read the book.
Wait, oh, so you talk about.
But you know, but yeah, they didn't focus on the children who, and that was me. So when I read Maya Angelou, I thought, I just have to hide this. So then I'm in the class, if you read the book, you know, I was in class, and I thought I was special because I knew who Maya Angelou was, I had read her stuff, and my teacher introduces Maya Angelou to the class, and I'm like, can I read? You know? And we get up, and we're reading, and I was always sort of class clownish and smarty-aleck. And then my teacher wheels out the television. You remember that?
Absolutely. The best day. The best day. The best.
The teacher wheels out the television. And we get to see Maya Angelou. I had never seen her perform.
Right.
And I know kids don't understand this, but VHS was fairly new. Video, all this was fairly new. Anyway, I never heard her voice.
And what a voice.
And what a voice.
What a voice.
And she starts performing, and I was infatuated. And I'm like, it rejiggered everything I knew, everything I thought I knew.
Right.
I don't know how to explain this except we had books as children and we imagined.
Yeah.
Right? You imagine their voices, you imagine everything. My mom used to listen to the soundtracks of Broadway plays. So I talk about this in the book. So I had for Color Girl soundtrack memorized, completely memorized. So I knew those voices. I had Nikki Giovanni's, she had Nikki Giovanni's album, so I had her voice. I knew her voice. I knew the cadence of her voice. We had that memorized. We had, the old school. We used to have Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. We used to have those albums. Those things we had. I knew that. I did not know her voice, and it was rich and robust and eloquent. And in this particular clip, she's laughing.
Is she performing?
She's performing the
She's
song.
performing.
But it's not the audience. So I'm gonna find this clip actually.
Yeah.
It's probably on YouTube or something. But she's like in the audience of some sort. She has this black, like dress on.
Yeah.
And she's sort of laughing. The bottom line is, in my mind, I know your story. In my mind, all of my laughter in my life, not all of it, but for the most part, if I'm in front of the audience, my laughter is contrived.
Right.
It is performative. I think about everything I do at this point in my life. So I don't understand. It felt real. It just felt like this is real joy.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, but I know what you've been through. I know who you are. I know your story inside and out. How? I could not understand it. It makes me emotional now. I couldn't understand it. So now, the burden on me, right? I'm like, I'm investigating this. I need empirical data. I need to understand where this comes from, because now you messed me up. I know there's pain, there's obviously pain. That part I got. There's no way that you came through what you came through without a body that's completely riddled with pain. That's who we are, right? You and I, Maya, that's how we are connected. How can this body that has pain, where's the joy? Where do you fit it? Where does it go?
Because at this point, this is high school, right?
This is my freshman year in high school.
Right, so had you accessed your own joy in a real way?
And that's what I'm like. I mean, I had access.
Had fun.
I had fun.
Right.
I did things that made me happy. I did things that made me, but for me, it was always fleeting, right?
Right.
You know that feeling. This is what joy, if you will, felt like for me. I was always reminded. So I would never forget, like, winning a track. Remember the Colgate games? I don't know if you remember that. Well, I ran track, so there was something called Colgate games. It was like a big deal.
Okay.
And I ran the Colgate game, and I won my race, and which meant that I was gonna be able to go to Madison Square Garden, which was a big
deal. It's a big deal.
And I was so excited. And I was just, I remember riding home in the car, being so happy, and then you remember. That's what my life was a constant up and down, up and down. Anytime I felt really, really happy, a memory would hit me, or something would hit me. So I never could fully access whatever joy was, whatever that thing was. It just never felt like it permeated, you know what I mean? So that thing that she had that was deep laughter and like all this stuff, I just didn't understand it. And now I wanted it, and I was like, well, if she got it,
I'll get it.
I'm gonna
get it too.
I'm gonna get it.
Yeah.
And
What was that process? Like how?
child, that was a process. It was like, I think it's a lifelong process.
Yeah.
Right? As an adult, I realized, as I became an adult, I realized I'm sure she was on a process her whole life too.
Right.
as a child, I just looked at it. What she did was open up possibility for me. I realized as an adult, she wasn't perfect, obviously, and her life wasn't perfect. But what I needed, what she gave me, was just a hint of possibility that something else was possible and curiosity.
Right.
And that was just what I needed, that little bit of thread to pull on. And then I became curious about what joy is.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, I think I talked about it in the book, but later on I started doing experiments. I talk about this in other places. When my daughter was young, I used to keep a joy journal that I would just, again, this is my word on this, I was like, I'm gonna figure this out. I used to just write down.
I love that.
I would just, and I would mean like a dear diary. Today I felt, it wasn't like that. This was literally like data.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime I felt something that felt like it stuck, or I would just write it down. And I always tell the story about where my friend was, and I would pick up Kaya from daycare.
Yes, I love this story.
Yeah, and I would, my baby was little, and I would go to the daycare and Kaya would hear my bangles when I hit the door.
Mm-hmm.
And my baby would come running down the hallway. Mommy's here! And I think a lot of people can resonate. For me, it's about, I did social justice work my whole life. I was probably angry at the idea that because I was a poor single mother,
yeah,
I couldn't have joy. It was during the era of The Secret and all of these things that people were selling us about how to access joy and how to manifest and all the rest of that. And it sounded good, but it all cost money. Right? I don't know if
y'all have a
this
conversation about like self-care and
it'd be late at night. I would be late at night watching TV and you'll be all into the infomercials and be like, oh my God, this is amazing. And you'll get to the end and they'll be like, for $89.99, you too can get this 7-cent series. And I'm like, come on.
how?
I got a light bill, I got a
Right.
car note. Nobody talks about this. This shit is expensive. Listen again. But it was expensive. And I was angry about that. I'm like, I have a child to take care of by myself, literally. I had a community that supported me, but I'm like, I have to make a choice between paying daycare and buying a 7 CD series that's gonna help me find joy. That's it? That can't be real. This is not what God intended. It pissed me off. So I was like, I'm going to figure this out myself. And I went to the dollar store. That's why, you know how many times people have asked me to sell it. I'm not selling you a joy journal. Don't ask me to buy it. Go to the dollar store. Better yet, go in your house and buy one of them. Get them journals. You know y'all got 50 journals in your house.
That's the Virgo thing. We have.
It's popular Capricorns and it's a couple of Libras in there. I know y'all got that. The pretty one that you promised that you was gonna start, Bring up the first 4 pages. Because you started on 4 pages and then you put it down. Write joy on the top. And because it's people keep trying to commodify this, it's not right.
It's not.
You don't need to, the point that I figured out, whether you're a survivor or not, we have all the things that we need, both to heal and to access joy. We have it. People are trying to sell it back to us. And that's what I figured out in the middle of this process. I was like, I turned on the TV. I mean, sometimes you can buy a book, it's $20, okay, $30, okay. But all of these like go on a retreat and and you put your down payment down and then you get on that retreat and they're gonna take the same thing. It's you and 20 women sitting there singing Kumbaya. There's somebody in the middle who has ordained themselves as a minister of joy or whatever. You don't need it. I'm sorry if I'm ruining somebody's hustle, but it's you know it.
It 100% is a hustle. And I like that you said it. You don't really necessarily need to commodify joy.
You don't.
You have the Googles.
You have. I'm telling you, so.
You have to Google.
You have to Google. You have to go.
We didn't have that. We did not have that.
But I'm telling you, you and your friends, the other thing I had was good girlfriends who I sat and had these complicated conversations with, because the thing that I love about what Me Too did when it went viral is that it created a community.
Right.
And that's what happened when I started doing this work. I started talking to people. I started with these young girls, but when I started, when we went on MySpace, what happened is I didn't think about adults, which is really interesting because I was an adult. The other two women that were helping me do this work were adults, and we were all survivors. And we looked around, and grown women started reaching out to us, and we were like, "This is for young people." And then we looked around like, "Oh, but we're adults."
Right.
And adult women started saying, "Please help us. There's nothing out there for us." And I realized the same exact thing that these young girls needed that we were working with is what adult women needed.
Yeah.
And it just kept sort of growing from there. And when Me Too went viral in 2017, the same thing that the young girls needed, the same thing the women on MySpace needed, it's the same thing that the women and people and survivors across the world needed. Survivors needed community. We were looking for each other. Somebody said it, needed to say it out loud, and then look at the person next to them and say, "Oh my God, you too?" That doesn't take money. It takes people caring about other people. It takes empathy. It takes compassion, right? Those things can happen when two people get together, or three people, or a community of people. And I think that's what people miss in all the commotion and the hubbub about, cancel culture and blah, blah, blah. I know I'm messing up your question.
Go ahead. But wait, before you do go ahead, we just need to get information about how long we have up here.
Hey girl, how long we got?
About 5-10 minutes.
Oh, that's okay. Okay. So,
Let's get back on track. You know I'm talking a lot.
wait, okay, so do you have to finish the thought?
I don't even know the thought.
My bad. Let's move on. Okay. So since we have 5 minutes, right?
What's that? She said 5 minutes.
She said 5 minutes. Since we got 25 minutes.
I'm not gonna argue with y'all.
I want to pivot for a second because we just talked about joy and pain living in the same body. There's another lesson that you learn is how you can love and loathe a person at the same time as well. And that's another duality that you speak about. And Miss Rose Sanders is the one that.
It's okay.
The answer. Yeah, she's the one that taught you that hard lesson.
Yeah.
Should we read?
Sure.
All right, let's read. I got my book back.
Now I'm in my glasses.
Now you need that. And also, I don't know if I remember marking the page. Where did we say?
I never thought of one of
You
these
know,
items.
yeah, you know your book. You wrote it.
But you want this?
It's the.
Give me a second, y'all. I'm gonna sing a little song right now. This
Nope.
is heaven.
We had it marked and then the book closed.
I know. But there is a part that I want to, I'll start here with Mercy.
Okay.
There are few things more painful than watching the folks you love actively not love you back, especially when they aren't outwardly unkind or distant, or they've spoken words that sounded like love and have provided support that could be construed as love without an understanding of the kind of love you need and deserve. That is where I was with the Sanders family by the end of 2005. I had started to question them and myself for being so committed to them. In 2004, Hurricane Ivan hit Alabama while a boyfriend and I were on a weekend trip for my birthday. I was in the mountains in Tennessee and left Kaya with Malika, Miss Sanders' daughter, my childhood friend and the mother of my niece, Princess. When the family decided to leave Selma and find shelter away from the approaching storm, I actually think I'm reading the wrong thing now. No, okay. When the family decided, Malika called my best friend at the time, Annie, to come meet Kaya. My girlfriend was stunned and confused as to why they would leave Kaya behind in Selma while they left for safety. We were all supposed to be family. It was one of the first times I started seeing the family dynamic a bit differently. The Sanders family were seen as leaders in Selma. They provided legal support, much of it pro bono, to Black people in the Black Belt long after the heyday of the movement. They were the lead attorneys for the landmark Black Farmers case, which led to a groundbreaking settlement. They had started legacy organizations like the National Voting Rights Museum and Institute, the Black Belt Arts and Culture Center, and the 21st Century Youth Leadership Movement. Historians of the Civil Rights Movement had written about the importance of their work. Their legacy is robust and important. I could never and would never take that away from them. But I know in movement communities, we have a habit of lionizing folks without calling them to account when they fall short. What is the point of a movement for liberation if we can't reflect the same dignity and accountability between each other that we are demanding from people outside of our communities? I was learning that the hard way by having my heart broken by people who claimed me as their own. Their love was unsubstantiated by their actions, and it confused me because in some ways, I defined my worth by how much they and others loved me. Now, for the first time, I was feeling like it wasn't enough, like my heart was hungry for something else. But I didn't know what to look for because it was all I had ever had. I asked God to help me understand what I was experiencing, but prayer couldn't prepare me for the moment our family ties reached the breaking point.
Well, I mean, you can read the next line, or we can just talk about what was the breaking point.
I'm gonna read this breaking point. This is the next one. The breaking point was Reverend James Luther Bevel was a giant of the civil rights movement. He was one of Dr. King's chief strategists and lieutenants, and he was the architect of some of the boldest, most historic events of the movement, including the Birmingham Children's Crusade and the Selma Montgomery March. He was also a serial child molester. We can talk about that.
Let's go there. So, the question, loving and loathing a person at the same time. Miss Sanders poured into you. She was the first person to call you a leader.
She was.
Right? And she got you into college.
Yeah.
She was able to get you work when you moved to Alabama.
Yeah. She supported me all through college.
She supported you through college.
Me and many other young people. Many. She's one of the most dynamic people I've ever met in my life, to this day.
Yeah.
I don't know how to describe her. She's a power. That's how I know this young man and his family, his father. That was hard, wasn't it? I know. She is, I don't know how else, she's magnificent. She is brilliant.
Yeah.
And I think this was such a blind spot for her and her family. And it's caused so much tumult. We don't speak anymore. We have completely severed ties. And for those who didn't read the book or who don't understand, James Bevel, and this is all public information, it's all, stuff that you can Google. I think because it happened right at the dawn of social media, it didn't become a whole big scandal because he died in 2008, but in 2007, he was arrested and convicted for incest. It came out that he had been molesting his daughters for years, years and years and years. He has many children, I think something like 17, something like 16, 17 children, 9 of them daughters. And they went through a long process to hold him accountable for his daughters. His daughters went through a long process. His children, his daughters and some of his sons, and went through a long process to hold him accountable. In the book, I talk about him coming to Selma while I was living there, and members of the Sanders family, including her and Ms. Sanders and her husband, taking him through a community process where the daughters came to them for help, saying, we need help to hold him accountable. They wanted sort of a transformative justice process. A lot of people don't, believe in going through the legal process and that kind of thing. They were split about that. The bottom line is the Sanders family, members of the Sanders family took him through this process, found him guilty, if you will, and then tried to remove him from the community. He did not obey that ruling, and when he didn't obey that ruling and stay out of the community, they didn't ring the alarm. They didn't tell people in the community, myself, others, that he was a predator. That he was, and when I say they didn't ring the alarm, he was around me, my children, my child, other children, for 3 years, from 2015 to 2015 to 2017. So that community trial happened in 2015. He wasn't arrested until 2017. And in that span of time, he was just free to walk around. And so again, he is ultimately the person who's accountable, right? The thing that I'm trying to highlight in the book is that we have a responsibility when we're in leadership, when we're in community, to, especially if you say that you are, that you love your community, that you want to lead your community, what is our responsibility? And I felt a deep sense of betrayal about it because I worked in the museum. He had an office. He came back and forth all the time. I'm a survivor. My child was a survivor. And you let this man walk around us, be around us. You didn't even pull me to the side and say, this is what's happened, this is who he is. You didn't, and I'm not saying you should have told me privately, you should have told everybody that would listen. Everybody. He did not deserve cover. Right? That's my point. He did not deserve cover, and his daughters didn't ask for cover. Right? His daughters did not ask to keep it a secret. His daughters just said, we want him held accountable, and we want the people in the community to be safe.
We want him away from children.
We want him away from children. That's what they wanted, and they wanted their youngest daughter. He started messing with them when they were as young as 4 and 5. He had a child, their younger sister at the time was 7 and in his custody. And they wanted their sister away from him. So it's a really tangled story, but I told it because I told my part, right? Because it's my story to tell, because it affected me, and they're very angry because they feel like I'm disparaging them. But this is what I'm talking about, loving and loathing, because instead of feeling like I want to be accountable for the role I played, you want to be angry at me for exposing your lack of accountability. And I won't be silenced about that. And you know what's interesting? I have been on every major talk show, I've been across this, nobody asked me about that. Nobody will bring it up. I've had one, the New York Times asked me about it.
So this is your first time?
I have not talked about this. Not in a major, The reporters ask me whatever, they skate around that, they don't talk about this. I was preparing, my publicists were all prepared, like, we have to be prepared in case this becomes a thing. Because the world, this is not a reflection on Martin Luther King, right? This is a reflection on the people, on this one person, and it's public information. You can go to your phone right now and Google James Luther Bevel molester, it'll come up. It's not like I made it up. But we are so used to, the other reason why I put it in the book is because we need to keep having conversations about how we talk about the R. Kellys and blah, blah, and the Weinsteins and all these men, and we have a long history of giving men like this cover.
Yeah.
We have a long history, way before the celebrities, we've been giving men like this in our community cover for a long, long, long time. We have to talk about it. Right? This man, also, the other duality here is Bevel is a giant in the civil rights movement. He did the things he did, right? We would not, he gave us the Southern Montgomery March. He gave us all those images you see from Birmingham. That's from the genius of James Luther Bevel. It doesn't change what he did, but we have to put that, you have to situate that in who he was as a human being and who he was as a serial child molester, and we have to be able to say that out loud.
Right. Two things can exist.
Two things can be true at the same time. And part of what's wrong with us in dealing with with sexual violence in general is that we feel like we have to make a choice, and we elevate the one that makes us feel good, and we hide the one that keeps us safe. Right? And in the process, we sacrifice the most vulnerable in our communities.
Yeah. I think, and you're looking like it's time. Okay.
Finish your thought.
All right. I wanted to just say, I think what for me disturbed me most about the Bevel story is that he himself didn't deny.
Nope, he does not deny it.
He actually is indignant in that was the right thing for him to do.
Yeah.
And so the question or the comment, I guess, is that had there been some sort of accountability on his part, is there space for someone who says, I have done harm, I have caused harm, I've hurt people, multiple people. Is there space for a person like this in a movement like this?
So Bevel is different because I think that he was dealing with mental illness, quite frankly.
Right.
He believed that God ordained him to do what he did to his children. Like he explained it vividly.
Right.
I think he is a separate sort of issue. That's why he is denying. And when you read it, I'm sure a lot of y'all will Google this tonight.
Yeah, it's out there. The information is public.
His explanation for what he did is different. So I think that's the thing. So he admitted it, but not from a place of accountability. He didn't think it was wrong. He didn't think it was wrong. Right. So that's why he was like, he has a whole weird whatever. I think that we have to talk about what accountability looks like inside of this movement, outside of a frame that is set in a strictly crime and punishment framework. Right? Because I think that sets us up to keep the cycle continuing in a way that does not support survivors and does not put an end to sexual violence. Right. And I think that people are also afraid to talk about that because it's all we've ever known, right? Law, order, crime, punishment, law, order. It has not gotten us anywhere. So yes, I think there's space for a different kind of conversation around accountability. Yeah. I think that when you talk to people, also the spectrum of sexual violence is very broad. It's very, very broad. There are people who have perpetuated acts of sexual violence who are survivors themselves. there are people who are perpetuating acts of sexual violence who don't understand the sexual violence. So it's very, very broad. But at the end of the day, we have to actually talk about them. We can't keep whispering in corners and then having these conversations on duality. So many men don't want to talk about Me Too or sexual violence because they feel like it's just about an attack.
Right.
Right?
And the issue I was a little bit close to.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the number of men that I've had conversations with who at the end they're like, oh, okay, I can talk to you because I thought you were about to scout me. You know, I thought you was right. And I'm like, no. Men's first role in this movement is as survivors. We don't even have space to have a conversation about men as survivors. No matter how many times I keep saying this is not a women's movement, that's exactly where we get played. Yeah. Right? So I think we actually have done a pretty poor job of framing, not me.
The other we.
But I do have to be accountable for that, right? Right. I'm part of the leadership in this. I think that we've done a poor job of helping people to understand exactly what this is because mainstream media has just eaten it up with the cancel culture and the who's next and the blah, 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 and the Me Too and who's going to be Me Too. All that kind of stuff takes away from the faces of the people who are actually just trying to find healing. They're trying to find their way back to themselves. Yeah. So it's hard to get through the mucking up. And it's part of the reason why I wanted to write the book, because when you have a book, at least you capture people for a moment. So I've only had 6 minute sound bites for 5 years. Right. You know, you see me on MSNBC and I'm like, oh yeah, this is what I think, and blah, 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 blah. And then it becomes a 4 minute sound bite when it comes on TV and you're like, oh yeah, and then most people are like, hey, I saw you on TV. You
listen to the words that out of my mouth.
you know how it is. Black folks love you. They're like, I saw you on TV, girl. You're like, thank you.
So I'm sorry to cut this short.
I know.
We have to take questions, and I had more questions, and I wanted to get to a few places. So maybe I should plant my question in the audience.
You switch places. You do not complain.
No, I want to.
Yes.
Let's open it up. Thank you so much for entertaining us.
Let's put a round of applause together. All right, folks. Sorry, I had to adjust this mic so y'all could actually hear me. So, honestly, just right quick, I want to thank you so much for sharing your story. Like, I feel like not enough people say that nowadays because we oftentimes hear about sexual misconduct, sexual abuse, sexual assault, etc. But thank you for sharing your story. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you. And with that said, I'm sure some of you have some burning questions.
If not,
I have questions.
We got more questions. I feel like y'all can keep talking. We might have to do a part 2.
Don't all jump up at once. But yeah, you have some questions. If not, you can.
If you do have questions, for the sake of not having it be super chaotic. Oh, she already lined up. She said okay. Put your hands up if you have a question, and if you're tapped by my lovely programs coordinator over here, Sesame, then please come up and the mic is yours. And we'll start with you. So put your hand up if you got a question.
First of all, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Like, I'm very inspired by just you, not even your story, but just you. My question is, you spoke about being a poor single mom, and there was kind of like a feeling that you couldn't have joy. I could definitely relate to that as well. Can you talk about the complexity of being a poor single Black mom? What does that add to the Black part?
Oh, I thought that was obvious, but yeah. I do think that being a Black woman who was, I wasn't told, but I do think the complexity is that Black women are told that what we find joyful is not enough too. So the other part to that, I'm thanking for that question. The other part to that I discovered in that process was that some of the things that I personally like to do that I found joyful, I think people disqualify. You know, so I like to, you know, as they say, hang out and hustle with my friends, right? I like to get my girlfriends together in the house and we laugh and joke, or I'm loud.
And funny. And funny. This is, you said too that, I'm sorry. No, go ahead. I was gonna say that you said that people find it arresting almost to know that you are hilarious.
That's funny to me. People always want to be, I think because of the topic, people are always like, so sorry. And then when I say something funny, they're like, I'm like, y'all gonna laugh? How do you think we gonna do this? But that was the issue, right? It was like, if you are I dress loud, you know, I wear like big earrings, loud colors, big hair, those things give me joy. And I had so many people telling me to tone that down. And so that was the other part for me as a Black woman. I was like, no, I need to actually turn this up because this is what brings me joy. So it's finding the space to also live out loud as in the ways I could, because you also know the other thing about not having a lot of money is that you gotta be creative. So I was hella creative, like white, with my little pennies. And you know, we had layaway and whatever. I was very creative with it. I've never missed a payment. You know, you wait, I'm like, ooh, when I get paid next week, or me and my girlfriend made sure our pay, you know, we got paid on opposite weeks.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's I'm about to derail the conversation, but layaway back in the day, you couldn't have your item until you paid it off.
Yeah.
Now, you get your item.
Do it.
With Afterpay and Sizzle and all of these things on your.
No, indeed, you get.
You get your item. And you're ready.
But what happens if you don't pay it off?
I don't know. But nonetheless, you make a payment. Yeah, you
They come to
make
your house. They must come to your house.
They probably, I mean, credit report coming in, maybe they, I don't know.
Child, what you didn't care about credit reports back in the day?
I don't even know what happened, but yeah, it
I'm
was.
sorry. That's nothing negative.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
That's what happened.
I told you I was going to love conversation.
I'm sorry.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
So actually, you answered my first question, which was to describe how it is that you chose this as your cover. And you spoke already about being colorful and the earrings and being
But that is a good story, though.
Expressive. And I also, I love the By the Butler. I love her.
Yes.
And I would love to know how you got to meet her and how she came to be the person that placed this.
So I didn't know her beforehand, but I was a big fan. And you know, this is a very interesting place that I am in life, right? Because I was, thrust into the spotlight as a regular person that was thrust into the spotlight. And so I sometimes don't know how to navigate being famous, if you will, like people knowing me. So my publisher wanted to put my face on the cover. And I was like, no, I don't want that. You know, very Michelle Obama, like I don't want that. And so we kept going back and forth, but this is a whole contractual thing. By contract, they got to say the last word. But I had like some say in it. So what I said to them was, okay, if you can get an artist to do a rendering of me, then I'll agree to it. And I said, I gave them two names. There's another sister named Keys. There's an artist, this woman named Keys, who had done a portrait of me. And I said, if you can get Keys or Lisa Butler to do a portrait of me, then I'll say yes. But I was like, that's not gonna happen. That's not gonna happen, because I wanted this, there's a picture in the back of the book, actually, this picture at the very back of the book of me as a child is the picture I wanted on the front. That picture right there.
Okay.
That's the picture I wanted on the cover because that's the picture that I used. That's the picture I used to discover how old I was when I was first assaulted because of the coat that I was wearing. So it meant a lot to me, and that's the picture I wanted. And they were like, no. Anyway, long story short, I didn't know this woman at all. I just followed her on Instagram. They found her, emailed her. She emailed back the same day. She was like, oh my God, I'm gonna be so excited about blah. I was like, are you serious?
I do want you to tell that this is what the artwork is.
So for those who don't know Lisa Butler's work, she's actually a quilter. So there is no paint in this picture. This is not a painting. This is a quilt. Blew my mind off. Completely blew my mind. And the other thing you should know, it's hard to see it, I don't even have it on. The necklace I'm wearing on here, that you can see, is kind of covered by the word Unbound. So what she did was she sent out, oh, I wish I had it here. So, I sent her a bunch of pictures. I'm known for wearing braids, whatever. But the picture I actually sent her, she chose, my hair is up, just my regular hair is up in a bun. So she chose that picture, but she said, I really want something with you in braids because people know you for braids. So she made those braids. The original picture is just my hair slicked up in a bun. So then she sent it to me, and I was like, this is so beautiful, but the necklace in the original is this like sort of African beaded necklace. And I'm not going to critique an artist at all. Right? I'm just like, whatever you give me, this is beautiful. And she sensed some hesitation, and I said, this is a necklace I wear all the time, my mother gave me, silver necklace, whatever. And it was due the next day. And she said, send me a picture of it. Y'all, overnight, she changed that necklace to the silver necklace. And she's just genius. And that's the story of this. I mean, she's so brilliant. And if you look really, really close at it, you can see the stitching and everything. Nothing on here is paint, it's all fabric.
Yeah. And if you want to look at her work, the name is Bisa, B-I-S-A, Butler.
Yeah. And she's from here. She lives in the DMV, right?
Yes, you do.
We have another question.
I'm a student with FCPS and
Tell me what that stands for.
Fairfax County Public Schools.
Okay.
Come a little closer to the mic here.
And my teacher, Ms. Thompson, encouraged
And Ms.
me
Thompson.
encouraged me to come out here after I had written my letter to FCPS curriculum writers in review. And my whole thesis statement was that FCPS hasn't accurately been teaching students about how we can overcome sexual violence and sexual assault, and furthermore, hold those who actually committed the crimes against those survivors and how we can help them accountable, essentially. And throughout that, I found a lot of survivors and a lot of victims, depending on what terminology they prefer, that haven't gotten the justice that they deserve, whether or not that's because of their race, ethnicity, or gender orientation, or anything like that. And my ask for you is, how could we further support those students to make sure that we can hear their stories and make sure that the curriculum that is needed for them to feel successful in their own body and their own learning in their seat, how can we do that?
You want a curriculum in the school?
Yeah, like, curriculum that we can learn how we can help survivors. There's no curriculum currently. There's no curriculum on what terminology should be used, on how we can help survivors and how we can support their stories.
That's interesting. I don't think there's a curriculum in any school probably. Thank you, first of all, for your question. I don't know that there's a school that I know of in the country that has a curriculum, but I would imagine that curriculum should have books that talk about sexual violence for sure. And it should probably have language, like literal, just, when I did my workshops with the young people in Selma, we literally started with language. And I think people are so afraid of language that it's gonna corrupt young people. But you just have to, these girls did not know literally what is statutory rape, the definition, what does it mean? What is every state's laws are different. I think that schools should literally teach these things. What does it mean? They didn't know what these things meant. So if you can't define it, if you can't say it happened to you. You know, right? You can't tell somebody what has happened to you, what you experienced, if you don't have language for it. So I would absolutely push for it. It could be in health or one of those kind of classes that deal with, you know, I don't know what I'm old, but I don't know what y'all teach. But I'm sure there's a class that teaches something along those lines. They can add those kind of things in there. And you're gonna have parents that are gonna be up in arms about it. But I just don't understand what parents think is happening. You don't want your child to learn by experience. That's my thought. So it's better for them to learn in a safe environment. You know, when I was at GGE, the organization I worked for in New York, true story, we had a program in a middle school, and it was about one of the chapters of one of the weeks was called rape culture. And the vice principal had a fit. We were ready to throw the program out of the whole school. We can't have this. So our program coordinator was so scared. She said, oh my God, what are we going to do? I literally opened up the book, the computer, I deleted rape culture, and I put healthy relationships. He said, we didn't change a word of the curriculum. Healthy relationships. And they went back, oh, thank you so much, thank you. Oh, you know, we just have to be careful. Oh, I know. We gotta be careful with our kids. So, you know, somewhere in there, but I just think it's important to have language, and I think it's important to have stories that young people can relate to, so they can see. But I want to just also caution you that it's not, there's a culture now that says that people have to tell their stories. This is not about creating an environment for people to tell their stories. It's about creating a safe environment. If they want to, they need to understand that it's safe to do so. But if they don't want to, they need to understand that it's safe not to. Yes. Right? So this is just about getting information, creating a place where they feel comfortable, where they feel held, where they feel empathetic. Those things are really important. But information is really powerful. So congratulations on you for even trying it. Come on, questions.
Hi, Ms. Burke. It's a pleasure. Can you hear me? It's a pleasure to meet you. I think you're phenomenal. And I'm just really curious, what made you, did you have a vision for this when you started? Like to see what it would come to see the impact it would have, number one. And number two, what is your hope for this book? I haven't read the book, unfortunately, but I'm going to get it. But what is your hope for the book? What do you want the book to open up, to invite, to do, to influence? Yeah, the legacy of that.
You know, I had a vision. It's funny, when I started doing this work, I still have them. I wrote letters to all these celebrities, Black women celebrities. I wrote letters to Gabrielle Union, Mary J. Blige, Queen Latifah, Oprah, Fantasia, and I think Eve, and Lil Kim, and any Black woman celebrity who I found, or Missy, who told a part of their story. Anybody who is identified as a survivor in any kind of way. Because I thought if I could just get them to talk about, because I used to use their stories in my workshops. And so it was clear to me that we needed pop culture, right, to be involved. I wanted to use pop culture as a way to get the message to little Black girls that healing was possible, survival was possible, and they identified so much with pop culture with these women, and I wanted to sort of expand this message, right? And I looked at I was 20-something, you know, and hopeful, late 20s, early 30s, and I had so much hope, and probably was very naive because I was writing like record labels and stuff like that. But I did have a vision that I wanted also Me Too to be like the rainbow flag was for the LGBT community. I wanted us to have like bumper stickers and we had t-shirts, we had little stickers and stuff. I wanted survivors to see it and know that like this is a safe space. This is another survivor, right? This was my big vision, but I never thought that it was possible in this kind of way. I thought it was like, you know how you dream, but you don't really dream? You know, like some sort of daydream. So it's really interesting because one of the lessons I learned was that I didn't really dream big. Like I dreamt in a bubble, right? Like I would doodle on the side of the page kind of dream, you know? So that's been really interesting because part of that was stifled by what I saw around me. Nobody really wanted to talk about this. Nobody was. I used to. It's always. I'm always in awe of people who come out together. I have had audiences as big as 10,000 and like huge audiences coming here and speak. And I remember the days of begging folks to get on the agenda. Like, if you could just put me at the bottom, just the last person, like, can I set up my table over there? Because who really wants to have somebody sit? I used to set up a table. We had these t-shirts. Of course, the t-shirt said me too. Nobody knew what that meant. And it's always usually a man who would come and be like, me too. Me too what? And then I would turn around and the t-shirt said, you're not alone, it's a movement, da 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 da. And they'd be like, oh, that's cool, that's real cool. And then just carry on. Nobody wants to be at this table. We were making it all pretty with all our little pink and black stuff and our flowers, and we'd be the only ones there, like, you know, so it just was hard. It was very, very hard. In terms of the book, again, like I said earlier, I just want survivors to see, I know people will see themselves in it, but see that it's really possible to access more freedom, you know, in whatever way, you don't write a book, obviously, but however you find ways to keep telling yourself the truth, do that. You can whisper in your pillow, you can talk to yourself in the mirror, but we know we're lying to ourselves. We know it. You know? You know it. You know it when you're closing your eyes and you see that little bit of truth out the side. We know it. And I just implore you to practice a little bit of courage. It's hard. It's still hard for me. Trust me. And I said that and it gave me a little bit of goosebumps because it's hard. But just every day, try to practice a little bit, you know, like I have to practice in these heels. You know? it's hard, but it's worth it because you practice and you give a little, but you're giving it to yourself, right? You give yourself a little, you get a little bit more, and that freedom feels good. You surprise yourself with it, and I just hope you put the book down and you're like, oh. I'm gonna do this today, you know, or I'm gonna do that tomorrow, or, you know, that's what I want for us because I just feel like the way the world has told us that we get to heal and we get to be free has been limited and stifled. People engage us from a place of pity all the time, and we are not pitiful. Look what we have survived. That thing tried to kill us, and for those of us who have been holding onto this in particular kinds of ways, it tries to kill us every day, still. And it sounds corny, I know it does, because it sounds corny as it's coming in my mind right now, but it really is the way that we fight back. We have the weapon to fight back. This thing is trying to kill you. You have something already in your arsenal to fight back. And I just want I want to give you something to help them access that. Because it feels confusing. How do I fight back against this? You feel helpless. Like we've been in this pandemic for 3, I don't even know how long, but you're not just a survivor of sexual violence, you're surviving all kinds of stuff all the time on top of that. And we need help. We need strategies. So I'm just hoping that the book is just something that helps us give you, some more help.
Another question? Did you say another question?
Oh, okay.
Hey, I was just,
Anyway, sorry.
those fleeting moments that you talked about before in the beginning of this
I'm sorry.
Is the mic on?
I don't know that the mic is. So you said those fleeting moments.
The fleeting moments of happiness you experience as a young person that wouldn't last long before you remember and you had to relive your trauma. What was one thing or something you did as a young person to help those fleeting moments last longer and be able to enjoy life fully in those happy moments?
I have to say, it was hard when I was a young person. It was
Wait,
when I,
did you hear the question?
did y'all hear the question?
Okay, so, yeah, so she said that how do you survive the fleeting moments of not being able to access joy, basically was her question.
So what I'll say is when I was younger, it was really difficult, right? What I did is as I got older, I'll tell you how I was able to prolong them. What we don't realize is that every time you are triggered and you get over it, every time you are, you get through a thing, you have what I call my toolbox. I remember what got me through that. It could be the slightest thing. Whatever got me through that, I'm doing physical motion, but I keep what I call my toolbox. So it could be, so I have a little thing of memes in mind. This is the truth that I can show you. I have a thing of memes on my phone that give me, like it's my little instant, get me out of my mood memes. Anything, literally anything. You know how in the Christian tradition they say count it all joy? You gotta count it all. This is what survival looks like. Like we throw around the word survival, but survival is a real thing. And we don't talk about the ugly underbelly of survival. Like you see all these like hoppity skippity running through the forest and the flowers in your hair and they call that survival. There's baby, watch out, I'm talking to the, watch out. There is an ugly underbelly to survival, and that's okay. Everything that you do, hold on to that to get through those moments. Even if it's a fleeting moment, you still got through it. Write it down, keep track of that, because what you know is that you got through it, right? And that's what counts. The length of time doesn't matter. That you got through it is what matters. And that's what I used to focus on is that it was short. That doesn't matter. What the other side is what matters. And so once you start focusing on how quickly it happened and came and went, you will start focusing on one day you're gonna look up and you're like, oh shoot, it's been 4 days. I used to focus on the fact that I was crying so much. Well, I can't get out of bed. It's been 3 days, I can't get out of bed. And then one day it was 4. I was like, oh shoot. Then it was 10. Do you understand what I'm saying? You build your arsenal over time. And that's a real thing. I think, I'm not a therapist. I think I have to give that disclaimer. But I've been in this game a long time, right? This happened to me when I was 7. I've been figuring out survival for a long time. And I mean, literally from the day after it happened. I made a decision to survive from day 1. The day that I decided not to tell my mother and father what happened, I started deciding to survive. I'm 48. I've been surviving for a long time. Every day that I'm breathing, I'm surviving. But at some point, I needed to elevate from survival because it was so hard. I wanted to thrive. I didn't want to think about surviving. This elder gave me this analogy one time about surviving being having your head above water and paddling like this underneath the water, right? And she said, I need you to get up out of the water. She said, thriving is not just getting up out of the water, but reaching back in the water and pulling somebody else out. So whatever stage you're at, I need you to be alive, right? That's don't be caught up in the stage again, but build your arsenal. Build your arsenal and be proud. I don't care if you got one tool. If your one tool is a meme you look at every day, it's fine. But just build your arsenal and you're gonna look up one day and be like, wow, look at all these tools I have in here. And don't judge yourself on what they are. They don't have to be fancy, they don't have to be whatever, they don't have to be, they're yours. The things that help you get through are yours, as long as they're not destructive to you, right? Because we, you know, I don't want to get into a whole bunch of other stuff. But that's the reason. That's the people who are, a lot of people turn to destructive things. They're trying to survive, but we don't want you to do things that are destructive. As long as they're not destructive to you, build your arsenal bit by bit, and you will find something really healthy and beautiful for yourself over time. It does take time, though. It really does. Just be gentle with yourself. Don't judge yourself for what you don't have. All of us out here trying to do the best we can. And I'm gonna tell you what else. I have bled my arsenal sometimes and been like, that, I got so over again. This stuff doesn't work anymore. I know we run out of time. This is a baby. I gotta talk to you.
Yeah.
I'm gonna tell you what. When Me Too went viral, I was 44. You couldn't tell me nothing. I had been doing this work a long time. I did all the therapies and the rapid eye movements and I did all the things. And I was standing, and they had invited me to press the button in Times Square in New York for the ball drop. Did I write this in the book? No. Oh, I keep forgetting what's in there. I tell you, I cut so much stuff up. And I was good. I had been good for a long time because I had my little arsenal. I knew how to deal with my triggers and my da-da-da-da. And I was standing in whatever the name, some fancy hotel in Times Square, surrounded by all my closest girlfriends. What wasn't you there?
Remember, I had a back issue.
Oh, right. My bad. I'm sorry. That's how my brain works. All my closest girlfriends. And we were going down the escalator, and I had a panic attack. I had a flashback. I had not had a flashback in years. And I didn't want to alarm anybody. I was thinking about everybody but myself. I'm made up, lashes out to here, hair, everything, and I'm crying. Nobody could see me though. My daughter was right here, I'm holding on the thing, and I'm crying. And I'm trying to hold it together. This hotel has this really long escalator. And I'm doing everything. I'm trying my breathing exercises. My mind is racing, trying to figure out how to pull it back together by the time I get to the bottom of this escalator. This hadn't happened to me, probably 10, 15 years. I got to the bottom of the escalator, and I said, hold on, y'all. I just pulled to the side for a second. I told myself I need to pray. I didn't pray, but clearly I have this is Times Square. You have to be time bound. You gotta press the button at a certain time. I can't be hold on, New Year, right? So I Miss Burke, we have to go. I'm like, I just need one. Literally, I had to press the button to bring it in 2018. I could not move. I went to the corner. I'm like, please God, please God, please God, please God. I had lost everything. Everything I taught myself. I lost everything in that moment, and I did pray. I was like, please God. I don't have nothing. I had nothing. I couldn't remember anything. The flashes just kept coming, kept coming, kept coming, kept coming. I prayed. Kaya, my baby knows me. Kaya came, was like, Mama, you okay? And I was like, pray with me, Kaya, please. So I lost it. We pulled it together, and I think one of my girlfriends was like, what's wrong? And I'm okay. I zipped it up, and it was cold as a witch's titty outside. Because they opened that door, and the wind hit me, and I think it just kind of shocked me. And I pulled it together, but that night almost took me out. And I realized I gotta start fresh. I gotta start fresh because everything that had been going on, it was December, all the Me Too stuff would hit me all at once. I didn't know this new world. I didn't know what was going on. It was lights, cameras, action. It was just so much. My point to you, my baby, is that we are all human. We are all struggling. You may see me on a cover of a magazine. You may see me on Sitting with Oprah. She got shit stuff too. I got stuff. She got stuff. You got stuff. We all have stuff. Sometimes you gotta start fresh. Be gentle with yourself. Okay? Come on, Denzel, don't make me cry.
Oh, how bad that man? How bad? Hi, Auntie. I haven't seen her in maybe over 15 years. So.
It hasn't been that long.
Yes, it has.
See, I see his brother going on my hand. Lord have mercy.
So trigger warning, everybody.
Baby, okay.
But I haven't talked about this in public forum, and you're the perfect person to discuss.
Y'all gonna be here for a while.
So I feel like as men in society, especially surrounding sexual assault and abuse, we really don't have any resources, tools, language, knowledge, even I feel like the instinctual ways to heal maybe have been stripped of us because of how we have to lean into masculinity. And y'all see she my auntie, right? And so for me, I was sexually assaulted at 15 by my brother's best friend. And when the most important male figure in my life found out, he told me it was my fault. He said that my behavior and mannerisms let people think that they can step to me that way. And that's black male talk for man up, right? And so when I think about that, it makes me think, what do we need to do as humans in relation to each other so that men too can start to become unbound?
Oh, thank you. Proper nap. So, so he calls me auntie because his dad was one of my mentors growing up. His dad, was it 4 y'all? 5 y'all?
8, what?
I'm in the boys. It's 5 boys. Yeah. And well, I guess not mentor is a strong word, but his dad was one of the elders, and I've known them since they were little boys, and watched them grow up, and so I know exactly what you're talking about. I know his temperament, and I'm so sorry for that. And I'm just really sorry. And I understand what you endured in that. And I said this earlier, and it's so true, that I think it is a failing of this moment and this movement that men feel so outside of what so many women and folks who don't identify as women, other folks, trans folks, have been, and gender nonconforming folks have been included in and had space in, because it's been reduced to us versus them. And so, even though I say men's first role in this movement is as survivors, there's very little space for men to be survivors openly in this moment. There are very little resources, and particularly for Black men, very particularly for Black men. Even, and I know that people would be shocked and awful for me to say this, but even in the conversation around R. Kelly, who absolutely is, should be held more accountable in every way possible for the things that he did, is also a survivor. And we couldn't, there's very little space to have a nuanced conversation about that. Because even as a survivor, you have to be accountable for the behavior that your behavior. is a hard conversation, right? Because the resources are the same. The resources that you need are the same that we need, and different. Because men need a space to be able to unpack the ways that you've been taught that masculinity is the center of your, masculinity ways that you've been taught it is the center of your universe. It's the center of the way you have to exist in the world. And that is so complicated. It's so complicated. I mean, going all the way back to our first conversation around the whole slap thing, right? I mean, there's so much conversation around masculinity tied to that. I really think that we have so much unpacking to do. I mean, your conversation is, what do we have to do as humanity? We have to re-educate and re-socialize. And I think that's almost impossible. But I do think one of the solutions is that we have to restart with young people, right? There's this whole push for comprehensive sex education in schools. And I think that we have to start, this generation is so, one of the most beautiful things I think about this younger generation is how they have embraced gender and sexuality and just all of these concepts that we've had such a hard time, our generation and Gen X have had such a hard time embracing. And I think that that is really going to be the future of how we shift these concepts, these ideas, and how we shift humanity, in dealing with these kind of issues. It's going to be difficult for my generation and older generations, and it's going to be very difficult. But I think these young people are going to demand something different. It doesn't solve your particular problem, but I think in terms of your question about humanity, these young people are not here for it anymore. They're just not here for it anymore, and it makes me so hopeful that we'll have something different in a 10-year time. You know what I mean? When I hear young people like this young person who got up and talked about changing the curriculum in school, that's so powerful. We won't have them coming up as parents and saying something like that to their children, right? There's a different kind of understanding. But also, my hope for my generation too is that, I'm a parent of a queer child who has taught me so much and has expanded me as a human being so much, particularly because of my love for that child, right? It has forced me to grow and expand as a human being. And I think that's going to be helpful too, because I just can't, like I said this, I remember when my child was in 7th grade and the counselor called me because they were being bullied because there were rumors that they were queer in school. And that was one of the first shifts I had, because I'm just like, at the end of the day, I'm like, child is alive. Period. I don't care how you identify. You can call yourself a dinosaur. I just need you to be alive. So we'll dress up like dinosaurs if we have to. We can paint this whole house a rainbow, but I need you to be alive. And so that was the first part of my understanding, like I have to make the shift, not that this is my job. And it's, everybody's not gonna carry that same attitude, but I do think that is gonna be a part of the revolution that helps to change part of my generation. But God, these kind of stories are heartbreaking because they just are. But the last thing I'm also gonna say to you is that, it takes the level of self-awareness that you have to know, because I know that you know where that came from and what it comes from, also helps you to know, I hope it helps you to know that you have to put that in a particular place. And the other hard thing, and this is real hard, because I know your family, I happen to know your particular family and other people I don't. The thing I say to people a lot is that boundaries are, what is the quote? I'm gonna read you this quote. There's a particular quote around boundaries that I think that are meant for this moment, because they are a lifesaver. And sometimes, as hurtful and as much as we don't want to, and sometimes we have to set hard boundaries with people that we love for our own survival. And it doesn't mean like I shut down, I don't speak to my family anymore, but we have to set particular kinds of boundaries. And it is difficult. It is so, so difficult. It's easy for me to sit up here and say that to people, whatever. I get it. I talked a lot about my mom in the book and the journey that we went through. And I had a lot of people say, well, why did you just not talk to her anymore? Why did you just leave out? Because that's not possible for me. That just wasn't a possibility for me. But I created a type of boundary that worked for me. And that might be something that you have to explore and other people have to explore, because it's about saving your life at some point. It becomes about saving your life. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to find it in time, but that's really real. When somebody they don't know better, I wanna say, I wanna believe they don't know better, but sometimes they do. And they just can't do better. And so you have to do better for yourself, for your own sake. So, thank you very much.
Can we take another question, or are we?
Let's get this last brother. He's just the last black man.
Kim, is it okay?
Let's do this last one, but I do have a puppy at home with a shot ladder.
You said what?
I got a puppy at home with a small ladder.
Oh, yeah.
While he's coming up, I found a quote. I just want to say it. This is a quote from Prentice Hemphill, and if you don't know Prentice Hemphill, you should follow them online because they are brilliant. But the quote is, "Boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously." I love it so much. It's the best quote. One more time. Boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. Right? Prentice, Prentis, Hemphill. Book coming soon.
That just hit home. Thank you. So I was not even supposed to be here today.
Look at that. Look at God.
I was driving by and then I heard about this and I said, let me come over and check it out. So I come at this from a different perspective in a way.
Okay.
I haven't experienced it myself, but my mom did. And so I grew up in a house where she experienced it throughout her life, up until she got married. I'm in Ethiopia, and that happens. It's just like it's not even, it's an unspoken, not secret. It's open. It's unspoken but open. And she struggled with depression, anxiety, attempted suicide in front of me. So there's a second. The primary victim, which is the victim, but there's a secondary, the children. And these children end up growing up with having deep, like depression issues, anxiety issues, this feeling unwanted, abandoned, because what a mother goes through, it has ramifications throughout the whole family. So it's not just the woman that's being impacted; it's the husband eventually, the children, and then and then this becomes generational. When Unbound, it's a bondage. It becomes a generational bondage. And when I actually look back to my family history, the same thing happened to my grandmother, and it's generational. So I think one of the things that you said that really touched me is we had to get out of this us versus them thinking, because when your plight is alleviated, my plight as a man is alleviated, and the plight of the children, and then we actually are able to at some point break the chain, because we're all caught up in this generational curse. So I guess what I'm trying to find out is what can we do to expand the vote, not just in terms of the direct victim, but also including the secondary and tertiary victims of of how this has ramifications and include that into the movement. Is that possible?
That is, I'm sorry, I'm so loud. That's so, thank you, first of all, for bringing that into the space. I think that's one of the ways that we can stop having a binary conversation about this and also bring men and other people into the conversation, particularly when we talk about communities of color. Because I think that we traditionally handle things as a family, we think of things in community. This is not different. And one of the problems that I see in the way we talk about sexual violence generally is as individuals. One of the things that really strikes me, and it has always been something that has bothered me since I started doing this work, is that we look at all of these other things. We look at gun violence and political violence and all of these other things as social justice issues. We do not see sexual violence as a social justice issue. And that's one of the ways that we can turn this conversation. When you think about this, when a child is shot in a community, we've seen it, right? We've seen it with Black Lives Matter and all this. When a child is shot in a community, we rally. People come and they protest, and we march, and we get our matching t-shirts, and we have fish fries, and we show up when a child is, or a person is shot in our communities, and we organize, and we say we have to end this violence in our community. We are all on the same page. This violence can't happen in our community. We say we have to get the guns off the streets in our community. We say we have to get the people who perpetuate this violence off the streets in our community. We are very clear about that kind of violence. What happens when a child is molested in our community? We say, be quiet, we don't know what happened. We don't have the whole story. We say, that's a good person, we don't want to ruin their career. Or that's the pastor, or that's the coach. He wouldn't do that, she wouldn't do that, right? It's all of these questions, and until we start looking at sexual violence in our community and say our communities are not safe, until everybody walking the streets is safe, we won't be able to have those kind of conversations. We look at it as at the individual. When somebody is experiencing sexual violence in our community, we say we have to get that person services. Send that person over to the rape crisis center. Send that person to the hospital. But we don't converge on that person as a community and say, how have we failed as a community? Where are the gaps in this community that allow this to happen? And so we have to rethink how we look at sexual violence in our communities. The same way we look at the political violence, the same way we look at gun violence and other types of violence, we have to bear personal responsibility. And I don't mean the rapists in the bushes that's jumping out and attacking people. I'm talking about the teachers in the schools, I'm talking about the pastors, I'm talking about whoever is committing acts of sexual violence or sexual harassment or sexual misconduct in our communities. We have to come together collectively and examine the places where it's happening and look at what we can do as a community to fill those gaps. Because it affects us all. If a person is sexually assaulted in our community, to your point, it affects more than just that person. There is political, economical, social, community ramifications to everybody who experiences violence in our community. So it is a social justice issue, not an individual issue. So thank you, that was a wonderful.
Thank you for that. Thank you for extending us grace with time. I too have a puppy.
Thank you for
So I see you. I see you.
You don't have to have a puppy play then. Don't worry.
Absolutely. But
Thank you all so much for coming in. Yes, let's go ahead and give another round of applause. Because this is Columbia, it's a drive up here.
Oh, right, we got John back.
I know,
you also have to sign up for this.
you do. And then we gotta celebrate. Speaking of which, if you're interested, we do have copies of Unbound for sale up front. Me and my lovely programs coordinator Stephanie will be selling them, and Tarana will actually be seated down here for signing. Please.
And if people want their books, they can bring them over to sign. So
Yeah, no, we're not gonna, we don't discriminate on where you got your book unless it's Amazon.
I have an important question. Is the kitchen closed?
Hell no.
It is?
No,
Oh, okay.
it's open. It's open, it's hot, it's cooking, it's frying, it's grilling, it's baking, it's doing all that.
Thank you.